Do you know what would happen to your children if you didn't come home tonight? Have you named a guardian for your kids? No? Why not? Can't decide who you would choose to care for your children in the event you couldn't do it yourself? If you're married, do you and your spouse not agree on the choice of a guardian? Or are you like my neighbor, afraid that planning for your death will somehow hasten its occurrence? How about foster care? Are you comfortable with the idea of your child spending any amount of time with strangers if something were to happen to you? Because I know I'm not. If you don't have a plan in place, I guarantee you your state has a plan, and your children could very well end up being placed in child protective services. Is that acceptable to you? Because it's certainly not to me. Knowledge is power, and knowing how to plan for the unimaginable will give you peace of mind. If you don't have a plan in place to protect your children, they could end up being raised by someone you would never want raising your kids in a million years. I too worried about this when it came to my 3 daughters. Then I figured out how to solve this problem. I discovered the process that needed to be put into place. No more sleepless nights for me worrying about what would happen for my girls. And I'm now on a mission to help other parents across the United States just like you. I'm Yael Lazar, and I'm the estate planning angel. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I was a single mom for the second time, and I was trying to juggle my home life and my work life as an estate planning attorney. As a result of my divorce, I knew that I needed to update my estate plan, since obviously my situation had changed. And ironically, I found myself in the same position that many of my clients and other parents with minor children found themselves in. Who is going to care for my youngest daughter in the event something would happen to me? My older 2 daughters were already of age. I spent many sleepless nights tossing and turning about it. Of course, her father would be my first choice, but he was significantly older and had some health concerns, and I was worried, what if he would predecease me? Who would raise my daughter the way I would want her to be raised? Was it fair of me to choose one of her older sisters? They were both in college and going to be going off to graduate school. Did I really want them to sidetrack their educational goals just to raise their little sister? They were practically still children themselves. What did they know about raising a child at 19 and 21? My only sister had just moved 2 states away, and she had her hands full with her 2 boys, one of whom had special needs. Plus, she now had just moved to the middle of nowhere, and I didn't want to rip my child away from her social and school environment just after being an orphan. I finally was able to understand why 69% of parents didn't name guardians for their children. It really is a daunting task. As a small local estate planning attorney on Long Island in New York, my focus was on creating estate plans that would not fail when my clients needed them to work the most. And the old way of practicing law in this field was very transactional. It was kind of a one and done. The attorney would name a guardian in the will, draft the other estate planning documents, the clients would sign them, and they'd toss them in a drawer and forget about them. This is a huge problem because it didn't consider the fact of what would happen if you didn't die, but you were merely incapacitated. What would happen to the children in that case? The parents' wills would not even come into effect, and their fate would be determined by their state's law in a court by a judge. Even worse, what would happen to those children whose parents hadn't put in a plan in place at all? Protecting my clients' hard-earned assets was of course important to me, but most important to me was protecting their most valuable asset, their children. I felt a sense of urgency that this problem needed to be fixed because there was such a gap there in the planning. I mean, children's lives were at risk, and that just didn't sit well with me. Children across the United States, were unprotected, and it became a high priority to me to educate their parents. And what I was struggling with was how I was going to educate parents on a much larger scale than just helping a handful of clients in my local practice. It upset me greatly not being able to impart this knowledge because I knew as an attorney what could happen to their children if guardians weren't named, or if worse, they weren't named properly. But what was far more upsetting to me was for those parents who didn't have any plan in place. They had no idea what could potentially happen to their children if they didn't take action immediately to protect them. It all came to a head for me when my friend's family member died unexpectedly at the age of 26, leaving a beautiful 3-year-old little girl behind. She had not named a guardian for her child. She had no plan in place. And what ensued was a lawsuit, a guardian proceeding in court amongst family members trying to decide who is going to take custody of this little girl. Ultimately, the case was resolved, and the girl is in a happy little home. But we'll never know if who she ended up with is who mom would have wanted raising her child, because she had no plan in place. And this happens all the time. It's all too common for a judge to have to decide. And what happened to that little girl could have happened with other families. And worse, children could potentially end up in child protective services, even if it's for a short amount of time. Could you imagine your children being led away by a police officer or a social worker and taken to foster care or an institution or worse? Your children have just lost their parents. They're heartbroken, they're scared. Is any amount of time acceptable to you for your children to be in the care of people whose beliefs don't align with yours, with strangers? I know as a mother of 3 daughters, that's absolutely not acceptable to me at all. And so I realized I really needed to be able to do something that changed that. Then I had that light bulb moment, as we all do. I had this great idea, and I knew it would absolutely change everything. I would be able to hugely impact lives of children and parents on a much larger scale. It was crystal clear to me what I needed to do. I needed to teach parents the necessary steps on how to protect their children and how to avoid the most common mistakes that parents and even their lawyers make when naming guardians. So I wrote the Kids Protection Planning Guidebook. That book explains the 10 simple steps I advise all my clients to take to protect their children immediately, and how without a plan, their children could end up in child protective services. It also includes my 4-step process on how to choose the right guardian for your children and how you could safeguard your children's inheritance with proper planning and not wasting the assets away. And lastly, it also includes an explanation of why estate planning is an ongoing relationship and it's never a one and done transaction. So if you want that peace of mind that thousands of parents across the country are getting, just click the button below that says Get Protection Now, just below this video. You'll be happy you did.